It's Build a Big Podcast. David Hooper here. PodX is over. I've got my first-hand account. You heard my initial thoughts on it. Now I'm going to talk about the conference itself. If I had to describe PodX, it is a blend of Comic-Con and VidCon and podcasting. It pretty much met my expectation that it was for fans. There was something a little bit deeper to it, though. First of all, let me read you what was there. There were a lot of live shows every day, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm going to count these up. 3, 6, 9, about 10 live shows a day. There was something called the Fan Track. And the Fan Track on Friday, for example, they had the Queer Podcast Space. I Wrangle Podcasts, Ask Me Anything. Producers Speak. Now that's what I call podcasts. I've got no idea what that's about. Fishbowl Podcast Edition. That's Fan Track. And then there was a Podcast Pro Track. That's what I did. And examples of the Podcast Pro sessions. Niche is more than you think. Building a podcast with convergence journalism. How to build a thriving fan base for your podcast. Top tips for being a hired host. There was a trade show. Or they called it a marketplace. I'm going to give you my disclaimer before I get any further into this, and that is that I've run events. Used to have a huge music business conference, the second largest conference in the country. I've done other events since then, several podcasting events. I know how hard it is to put butts in seats. I know how hard it is to organize an event like this, to get great speakers, to keep the whole thing moving forward. So I want to be conscientious of that. And I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to report. With that said, here's my initial experience. This event, PodX, it was at the Music City Center. I would call that the convention center. That's what locals would call it. It is big, and there is a lot of room to fill. In about 6 weeks, I'll be speaking at an event called NAMM. NAMM probably has 10, 15,000 people there. A lot of people at NAMM. That is the typical event. The NRA convention was at the convention center. They have very large events at this venue. I went to check-in, 2 people ahead of me. More people at the check-in than were ahead of me. Now, granted, this was the second day. Maybe everybody checked in the first day. My first stop, just to kind of get a feel for who was there, was the trade show, or as they called it, the marketplace. It's a mix of booths. I mentioned Vocal Ease on yesterday's episode. It's a throat spray. It's perfect for after a long day of talking at a conference. There was a podcaster that I knew there. Libsyn was there, the hosting company that this podcast is hosted on. There were a couple of booths with merch, a booth with equipment. While I was at the marketplace, a buddy of mine, local podcaster, a guy named Jeff Sanders, he walked in. He's got a podcast called The 5 a.m. Miracle, kind of a business success type podcast. It's about having an intentional day. JeffSanders.com if you want to see what he's doing. Anyway, Jeff walks in, and before I got to the trade show, I saw that Netflix had a studio set up. And you could go sign up for the studio, record a live podcast there. I said, Jeff, let's go sign up for this. I would love to get your initial thoughts before I talk to you here. Let's put everything on mic. I want to know what you think about this event. So we went to record. We were able to get in immediately. As we were in there, another guy that I know walked by. There were 3 mics. So I said, get on the mic. His name also Mike. That was Mike Stewart. Mike is an interesting guy because Mike has what I would call an ugly podcast. It's not very flashy, but it's a very successful podcast. He's doing about $30,000 a pop with his back end. It's an amazing story. I've actually put out a video about it. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to send it to you. Go to bigpodcast.com. Just sign up for the mailing list. Get in touch with me. I will send you this video. So anyway, I've got these 2 successful podcasters, Jeff Sanders, Mike Stewart. We created a great podcast episode. I'm planning on releasing that here. If you want to make sure that you don't miss it, go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to this podcast, get the live from PodX episode. Most of my day ended up being spent with Mike and Jeff Sanders. By the time we got out of our live recording, hey man, do you want to go get some food? Mike looked at his iPhone. There's a pizza place right next door. We went to it. It was great. We were able to eat outside. A beautiful, non-humid day, which is rare for Nashville in June. Sat outside, and we helped each other with our businesses. So in that case, just going down there for that was a success. The rest of the day, I spent talking to people, and I want to give you some of the big takeaways that I took away from PodX. What was very clear to me at this event is that we are in silos. Podcasters are in silos. You've got the NPR types. You've got the big business types, people like GE, Google, these big businesses that have their own podcast. You've got the indie biz types, independent businesses. That's guys like me. That's guys like Mike. By the way, Mike's doing that $30,000 a pop with a pest control podcast. Not sexy at all. So again, if you want that video, I will happily send it to you. It tells what he's doing. It's a pretty fascinating story. Bigpodcast.com for that. And then the fourth silo, that's what I would call fandom or community. And these were people, a lot of the people that I met at PodX, they were doing podcasts on things like Dungeons and Dragons. I met a woman named Sarah. She has a podcast. It's called Four Friends and Some Dice, an actual play D&D podcast. So check it out, Four Friends and Some Dice, if you want to see what she's doing. Met another guy. He's got a podcast called Relativity. Relativity is a science fiction radio drama about a lone man in space and the brave woman battling to keep him alive. So there were a lot of different podcasts represented at PodX. Definitely a lot different from other podcasting events that I had been to. Something else I think was different about this event was these people loved podcasting. A lot of times you'll go to a business-related podcasting event, marketing-related podcasting event, or you'll have something where big business is in and where companies have sent their employees to a podcasting event. And these guys are using podcasting as a means to an end or a way to sell something. Or again, these companies that they send their employees to these events, those guys don't care. And a lot of them don't know why they're there. Well, I'm just here because podcasting is a thing, and my employees sent me here. The people at PodX, they were different. It was a very young audience, about half my age. A lot of guys in their early 20s. And again, they love podcasting. I mean, really love it. I think it's for two reasons. The first is it gives people a voice. And we all have this. But I think as podcasters, I think we forget it. I've been podcasting since 2005. I'm 46 years old. And talking to these guys, it took me back when I was 15. As you may know, if you've been listening for a while, I used to be in the music industry. And before I was a music marketer, I was a musician. And when I was 15, I was a freshman in high school, and I got serious about playing guitar. And the reason that I was attracted to guitar is because I thought people would pay attention to me. It gave me a voice. I could go out, play a song, do a gig. People would pay attention to me. Nobody had paid attention to me before that. And I think for a lot of these people who are at PodX, they're these young people, and nobody had paid attention to them until they had a podcast. And part of that is because sometimes people don't know that you exist. And that's one of the things that I talk about at bigpodcast.com. Podcasting allows you to fly your flag, whatever that is. If you're a conservative Christian, fly that flag. If you're gay, fly that flag. Transgender, fly that flag. If you're conservative, liberal, fly those flags. By you flying that flag, it lets other people know that you exist. It lets other people know how you feel. And they feel the same way. And that's the second thing that I think makes podcasting so great to these guys who are at PodX, why they love podcasting so much. That's the connection. You have your voice, you reach these people, then you connect with them. You realize that you are not alone. Met a lot of people, they were from the area. And when I say area, I mean the southeastern United States. A lot of people drove in, but a lot of people drove in not like I did. I drove about a $5 Lyft, so probably 10 minutes away. I mean, I'm pretty close to downtown Nashville. It was easy for me to get to. I'm talking about people who are driving 5, 10 hours. So in the region, not across the country, but they still took a significant time to be there. A lot of them from small towns. And if you're in a small town, and I've lived in a small town, the smallest place I ever lived, 10,000 people, it can be very easy to think that you are the only one. When you were young, it's very easy to think you're the only one. You're the only one who cares about Dungeons and Dragons, or you're the only one who cares about science fiction, whatever it is. Podcasting allows you to bypass that. This is kind of going back into internet history, but if you think about the mid-1990s, this is when the internet really started to blow up. And the reason that it blew up was because American Online, AOL as it's known, they opened their service up to the internet. And one of the byproducts of this was a lot of people in small towns across America started coming out. Suddenly there were a lot more gay people, or at least a lot more gay people that we knew about. They were always there, but they were afraid to come out of the closet. The internet let them know that they were not alone. Podcasting is doing something very similar. This is an interesting event. This is, I think, the first event that I had been to. They asked me my gender, and the choices were male, female, or non-binary. And I'm thinking to myself, you would not see this at NAMM. You would not see this at the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. You would not see this at National Association of Broadcasters. As I mentioned in my initial thoughts episode about PodX, not a lot of people were at this event. But it didn't matter. The right people were at this event. The true fans, people who wanted to connect with each other. You go search for hashtag PodX on Twitter, Instagram. You won't see people talking about, hey, where are all the people? You will see people talking about, oh my gosh, I met this person, and I met this person, and I've been wanting to meet this person. It doesn't matter how many people are there. It matters if the right people are there. I talk about this with your podcast all the time. People get caught up in numbers. Oh, I got 1 million downloads. Or I got 100,000 downloads. Whatever your number is, that big number that you want. Who cares? Who cares? What matters is, are the right people listening to you? When I do podcast interviews, I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago. The guy said, I don't really have a big audience. I said, it doesn't matter, man. It's the right audience. I got a book. It's called Big Podcast. It's for podcasters. And he had a podcasting audience, an audience of people who are making podcasts. Well, that's what I want. That audience, even if it had just 500 people, they are all podcasters. And 500 people who podcast is better for me than 20,000 people who don't podcast. Because my book is for people that podcast. By the way, if you're interested in that book, bigpodcast.com/book will get you more information. I think this was a great event. I think it's a great start. I hope that they will do it in Nashville again. I'm going to reach out to the organizer, see if I can help with that. I think it's something that we all need to be aware of, the people that we are reaching with our message. Let's not take that for granted. Like I said, the 2 reasons I think these guys loved podcasting so much. 1, voice. It gives them a voice. It lets them know they're not alone. And 2, connection. It connects them with other people who are just like them. So let's not take that for granted. What we are doing is powerful. Speaking into a microphone, having others hear our message, that is powerful. I'm not sure if PodX is returning to Nashville or not. There were rumors that they are not. I'm going to reach out to them and say, yeah, man, I hope you guys do come back. I thought it was a good event. We'd love to have you next year. Thank you for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want me to help you spread your message, I can do it. I'm at bigpodcast.com. As I have mentioned, you want to make sure that you don't miss an episode of this podcast, because that is what I talk about here, spreading your message, reaching people, making money with your podcast. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. 3 buttons on there, an iPhone button, an Android button, and an RSS button. Pick the one that you want. I don't care how you listen, just listen. And I will see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.